Preparation of inorganic compounds. Preparation of pure sample of ferrous ammonium sulphate. We require electronic balance, wire gauze, tripod stand, Bunsen burner, china dish, ferrous sulphate, ammonium sulphate, beakers, dilute sulfuric acid, ethyl alcohol, etc. Using the spatula, take a small amount of ferrous sulphate crystals, place a butter paper on an electronic balance and tar the balance. Put the ferrous sulphate crystals on the butter paper and weigh about 7 grams of ferrous sulphate. Then transfer the weighed quantity of ferrous sulphate into a beaker. Now, weigh about 3.5 grams of ammonium sulphate on another butter paper using the electronic balance. Transfer this into the same beaker. Take 3 milliliters of dilute sulfuric acid in a measuring jar. Add this into the beaker containing ferrous sulphate and ammonium sulphate. Take 20 milliliters of distilled water in another measuring jar. Pour this into another beaker. Boil the beaker containing distilled water for about 5 minutes over the Bunsen burner. Add the boiling water to the beaker containing ferrous sulphate and ammonium sulphate in small proportions while stirring the contents using a glass rod. Do this until the salts have completely dissolved. Take a funnel and fix it on a stand and place a filter paper in the funnel. Set a clean china dish below the funnel. Filter the solution in the beaker through the funnel into the china dish. Place the china dish containing the clear filtrate over the Bunsen burner and heat it gently while constantly stirring until the crystallization point is reached. Transfer the concentrated solution into a crystallizing dish. Cover the dish with a watch glass. Place the crystallizing dish in a trough containing cold water and allow it to cool. As the solution cools, crystals of ferrous ammonium sulphate separate out. Decant the mother liquor quickly. Pour a small quantity of ethyl alcohol into the dish and wash the crystals with alcohol. Remove the remaining alcohol from the dish through filtration using a funnel. Transfer the ferrous ammonium sulphate crystals onto a filter paper and dry the crystals by gently pressing them between filter papers. Then, transfer the dried crystals onto a watch glass and label it. Preparation of pure sample of potash alum. We require electronic balance, spatula, watch glass, potassium sulphate, aluminium sulphate, beaker, measuring jar, distilled water, dilute sulfuric acid, wire gauze, tripod stand, Bunsen burner, china dish, crystallizing dish, ethyl alcohol water mixture, stand with clamp, etc. Take a butter paper and place it on an electronic balance and tar the balance. Using a spatula, take a small quantity of potassium sulphate. Put this on the butter paper and weigh about 2.5 grams of potassium sulphate. Transfer the weighed quantity of potassium sulphate into a beaker. Take 20 milliliters of distilled water in a measuring jar and pour it into the beaker. Then stir the solution in the beaker using a glass rod until the crystals in the beaker are completely dissolved. Place another butter paper on the balance and tar the balance. Take a small quantity of aluminium sulphate. Put this on the butter paper to weigh about 10 grams of aluminium sulphate. Transfer this into another beaker. Take 20 milliliters of distilled water and pour it into the beaker containing aluminium sulphate. Then take 1 milliliter of dilute sulfuric acid. Pour it into the beaker containing aluminium sulphate. To prevent the hydrolysis of aluminium sulphate, heat the contents in the beaker for about 5 minutes over the Bunsen burner. First, pour the aluminium sulphate solution and then the potassium sulphate solution into a china dish. Mix the two solutions using a glass rod. Place the china dish containing the solution over a wire gauze kept over a burner and heat it gently while constantly stirring until its crystallization point is reached. Transfer the concentrated solution into a crystallizing dish. Cover the dish with a watch glass. Place the crystallizing dish in a trough containing cold water and allow it to cool. As the solution cools, crystals of potash alum separate out. Decant the mother liquor carefully into a beaker. Take a funnel and fix it on a stand and place a filter paper in the funnel. Set a beaker below the funnel. Pour a small quantity of alcohol cold water mixture into the dish and wash the crystals. Transfer the washings into the beaker through the funnel. Again, pour alcohol water mixture to the dish and transfer the whole crystals into the funnel. Do this again to transfer the crystals sticking to the dish into the funnel. Take the crystals from the funnel using a spatula. Transfer the crystals onto a filter paper and dry the crystals by gently pressing them between the filter papers. Then transfer the dried crystals into a watch glass and label it. Preparation of potassium triosolato-ferrate 3. We require electronic balance, wire gauze, tripod stand, Bunsen burner, ferric chloride, potassium hydroxide, hydrated potassium oxalate, hydrated oxalic acid, beakers, ethyl alcohol, spatula, glass rod, Buckner funnel, etc. Take a small amount of ferric chloride using a spatula. Place a butter paper on an electronic balance and tar the balance. Put the ferric chloride on the butter paper and weigh about 3.5 grams of ferric chloride. Transfer the weighed quantity of ferric chloride into a beaker. Take 50 milliliters of distilled water in a measuring jar. Pour it into the beaker containing ferric chloride. Stir the contents in the beaker using a glass rod to dissolve ferric chloride completely. Take a small amount of potassium hydroxide using a spatula. Weigh about 4 grams of potassium hydroxide. Transfer it into another beaker. Then take 50 milliliters of distilled water. Pour this into the beaker containing potassium hydroxide. Then stir the contents in the beaker using a glass rod until potassium hydroxide is completely dissolved. Add potassium hydroxide solution to ferric chloride solution in small proportions while stirring constantly using a glass rod. A precipitate of ferric hydroxide is formed. Place a filter paper in a Buckner funnel and transfer the mother liquor into the funnel. Pour a small amount of distilled water into the beaker and wash the precipitate. Transfer the washings into the Buckner funnel. Again, add a small amount of distilled water into the beaker containing the precipitate. Repeat this process and then filter the precipitate. Take a small amount of hydrated oxalic acid. Weigh about 4 grams of oxalic acid. Transfer this into a beaker. Then take a small quantity of hydrated potassium oxalate. Weigh about 5.5 grams of potassium oxalate. Transfer this into the same beaker. Take 100 milliliters of distilled water. Pour this into the beaker containing hydrated oxalic acid and hydrated potassium oxalate. Stir the solution in the beaker thoroughly using a glass rod to get a clear solution. Add the precipitate of ferric hydroxide in small amounts into the above beaker and stir the solution. Take a funnel and fix it on a stand and place a filter paper in the funnel. Set a clean china dish below the funnel. The stem of the funnel should touch the wall of the china dish to avoid the solution splashing out. Filter the solution into a china dish. Heat the contents in the china dish on a sand bath until the crystallization point is reached. Place the china dish containing hot saturated solution in a trough containing cold water. Cover the china dish with a black paper as the complex is sensitive to light. Allow the solution to cool for some time. As the solution cools, the crystals of potassium trioxylatoferrate 3 separate out. Decant the mother liquor. Pour a small quantity of ethyl alcohol into the china dish and wash the crystals with alcohol. Transfer the washings into the beaker. Transfer the crystals onto a filter paper and dry the crystals by gently pressing them between filter papers. Then transfer the dried crystals of the complex onto a watch glass and label it.